So all bourbon has three things. You have corn, you have the yeast, and then you have the barrel. But what if you decided to reprioritize everything and make corn the biggest priority, which is rare? Well, I was recently in Charleston, South Carolina, visiting the High Wire Distilling company, and instead of chasing trends or doing limited releases, they decided to build everything around a grain that almost disappeared forever. And while I was there, I got to spend some time with Rachel, their master distiller, getting a behind the scenes look at how they actually make their whiskey and really starting to understand why their bourbon doesn't taste like what you expect bourbon to taste like. But here's the part that hooked me. Betting on that grain almost broke them, but it also made their whiskey different than anything else you're gonna find on the shelf. Let me explain. So they didn't start with some master plan to disrupt the bourbon industry. They just asked a simple question that most people don't ask. And that's really, what if we made corn the most important component of the entire whiskey making process? One of the founders actually comes from a food background and not a legacy whiskey family or from the whiskey industry. And when you look at whiskey or bourbon like a chef, then there's gonna be one thing that jumps out at you almost immediately. Corn makes up the majority of the mash bill, and people aren't really talking about what corn they use. Generally the same commodity corn, same results, same flavor. High Wire Distilling didn't like that, so they were like, all right, let's not focus on how to make bourbon faster, let's focus on how to make bourbon better, and we're gonna start at the farm. And this is where the story just gets really interesting. If you stick to the end, I think you'll have a brand new appreciation for High Wire Distilling Company. So they asked that question, and that question led to a grain that most people have never heard of. So it's called Jimmy Red corn. And if you haven't heard of it, that's not on you. It's not rare or it's not niche. It was almost gone entirely. And when High Wire Distilling Company got interested in Jimmy Red corn, there was barely any viable seeds left. And they didn't do it for some off the wall romantic idea or marketing. They did it because of the way it tasted. And when they cooked it down, the mash wasn't actually neutral. It smelled rich and oily and almost nutty, which is uncommon with just an entirely corn mash bill. And even more interesting than that is when they actually distilled it, it had this thick, oily cap on the top. And I think that was the moment that they knew that this wasn't just an ingredient, this was their whiskey. And here's where things got risky. Because they committed to Jimmy Red, they had to build the entire distillery around it. They partnered with local farmers to bring that almost forgotten and lost grain back into production. And they waited seasons, not weeks, to see if it was even worth it. I mean, that's wild. This isn't a cool risk story. This is, if it fails, we fail, at least the way I see it. But as you can probably tell with the bottle sitting right here, that risk was worth it. And so here's what that difference shows up as in the glass. It doesn't scream at you, it kind of lingers. And it's sweet, sure, but it's more honeyed than it is sugar, and it's more roasted cornbread than it is candy. There's like a weight to it that sits around on your palate and lingers. And here's honestly kind of the craziest part is they didn't cover it or hide it or do anything with rye or barley or wheat or any other grain. It's 100% corn. They let that ingredient, that corn, that Jimmy Red corn that they love so much, tell the entire story. And I'm telling you, it's this earthy sweetness and the payoff is real. And here's the part that really impressed me more than anything. That mindset that they had thinking about corn, the core ingredient from the start, going all the way back to the farm, that mindset follows through everything they do. When I was walking through with Rachel, the master distiller at High Wire Company. And it's kind of an interesting moment because I recently sat down with Steve Nally when I was at KBF, the master distiller for Maker's Mark in, the 1990s, 1980s. And he said something really interesting to me because I was asking him, why was the whiskey, the Maker's Mark, the 1993 standard bottle, so amazing? And he kind of gave me a simple answer I didn't expect. And he just said that there was no automation, or at least there wasn't as much. And so every part of the process, everyone took their time. They were thoughtful, they couldn't rush it. And it was less about efficiency and more about completing that part of the whiskey making process to the best of your ability. And you really got to know not only the equipment, but the grain you were working with. And usually that master distiller was touching each part of that process daily. And that still happens today, and there's nothing wrong with efficiencies, I don't think at all. It's just a really interesting note that Steve Nally said. And then going here at High Wire Distilling Company and watching them build out a still that was specifically made so that it can be hands-on, that it put more control into Rachel's hand, and that, you know, she can really fine tune that distillate to the flavor profile that she's looking for. So I really think that they, instead of rushing through building this distillery, it, you know, only opened in like 2013, and I may have that off by a little bit, but I'll put the correct date somewhere like right here. But that mindset really carried through, and now that they're producing some 6, 7, 8-year-old whiskey, you're really starting to see that pay off. And I could not be more excited about the time and energy they put into doing this thing right, and doing it different than what people probably would have told them was the right way to build out a whiskey. And to kind of bring it full circle, they start with the farms, and they have partnered with so many local farmers in South Carolina to kind of rebuild this grain that did not exist practically. But when they're done, they take all that spent grain and they give it back to local farmers as well, or, you know, anyone that could use that grain. When I was there, Rachel was telling me that a lot of this grain goes to a farmer that it goes to feed his goats. And so he picks it up, you know, weekly and goes and feeds his goats. So it's this kind of full circle, full loop situation for the local community, which I just think is kind of awesome. And in that same vein, I was walking through the distillery with Rachel, and she walked me over to this table where she had all of the spices and fruits and ingredients like lemongrass, and she was showing me how she builds out the botanical flavor profile for their gin. And I thought that was really cool. It's just really cool sometimes to see that people just get down to the simple stuff, and they put a palate that they trust, and they start trying it out, trial and error, just like a chef would. And that really is the foundation of everything I saw there. They really think of things like a master chef would, and they focus on the small details, and they don't over optimize, they don't over engineer things. They give room for the people that they trust to make really fantastic stuff. And I like gin, my wife likes gin, and my wife happened to be with me, so that was exciting for her. They also do things like they make in a bruisey rye that she showed me is a rye grain that actually started in Italy, and it came to the States, specifically I think the South in Charleston at some point in time, and they used that grain, a bruisey rye. I actually have a bottle right here, really cool bottle. It's I love the shape of this bottle, but that's also 100% a bruisey rye, similar to Jimmy Red being 100% red corn. This is 100% a bruisey rye. And they focused on the same concept, making sure that they work with locals and that they source it in a smart way. And I'm telling you, this rye is phenomenal. Jimmy Red's phenomenal too, but both of them really blew me away. And I wanted to do a quick note here. I learned a lot from Rachel walking around the distillery about their current operations and how they really make fantastic bourbon and rye and gin and Amaro. But I also did some research on my own, and I'll put a link in the description of a really fantastic article that I pulled a lot of interesting information from that, you know, I just wanted to give a shout out to, because I think they did a really good piece on High Wire Distilling Company. And, you know, I love the video content. That's why I'm in this game. But it's kind of nice sometimes when you see a article and it's written really well and has a lot of really good information. So I'll link that in the description below if you're interested in that type of thing. And while you're at it, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button. It really does help the channel a bunch. And if you're interested in digging in with the community a little more, I do have a Patreon group, and I also have a Discord group where a lot of the people, both from my Patreon group and from the YouTube and Instagram community, kind of come together and kind of nerd out on whiskey and bourbon. And it's a place where everyone's welcome. All questions are welcome. And I think it's just a really fantastic place that we're trying to grow out our community. So if that's interesting to you, I'll put a link for both of them in the description as well. Okay, now to kind of bring it full circle, I just wanted to give a huge shout out to Ann and Scott, the founders of High Wire Distilling Company. They started this adventure, and, you know, they had a background in food and hospitality and restaurants, but they took a chance. They'd had no no skill set specifically for the whiskey or the distilling industry. And not only that, they gave it a fresh look. And they did something that no one else was willing to do. Take a grain that was on the brink of extinction and build out an entire framework within the local community to bring that grain back to life. And then wait to see if that grain actually paid off. And that's where we're at today. So a huge shout out for not only the risk, but the vision and just the commitment to stick through with something. Because nowadays everyone's looking for the biggest shortcut, and being there with Rachel and being there with the entire team, I didn't see any shortcuts. And I've been going to High Wire Distilling Company for a little while and kind of watching the evolution. And it's really at this moment that I realize it really paid off, and I couldn't be happier for them. And if you're interested in High Wire Distilling Company, then I would definitely recommend, if you ever make it down to Charleston, South Carolina, to check them out. Charleston's an amazing place, so it would be worth the trip regardless. And if I were to give you recommendations on what to try, right here I have the Jimmy Red Double Oak right there, and it is really good. I enjoyed this a lot, but their Jimmy Red standard offering is good, and they do have single barrels, and I may be interested in pursuing one of those in the future. If that's something you're interested in, please let me know in the comments, and also let me know if you've ever tried it. I'm very curious everyone's thoughts on High Wire Distilling Company, and specifically some of these expressions that they are making, these sweet mash expressions that they're making. So this is the double oaked, but the regular one is good. And then, like I said, I'll put it up here. This is the rye whiskey with a bruisey rye. That's a fantastic bottle. Their gin was good, and just everything that they're putting out is really good. So really a big thumbs up for at least giving them a shot. They're reasonably priced, and I picked these both up myself. They weren't given to me. I think that's really important in this industry, that we continue to support those companies that are putting out a really good product. And I was happy to grab these 2 bottles and share them with my friends and family. These aren't the only 2 bottles I have. I actually have other bottles, and I'm just ready to continue to support a company like this that's kind of changing the game. And I had a video, I'll link it, maybe I'll link it here if I'm smart enough to figure out how to do that. And it was kind of like the bourbon boom being over, and we're kind of in that space now where we're starting to see things soften a little bit. And I really want to see companies like this start to move forward in the pack. And I think it's already happening, because we're seeing them a lot more nowadays, because the proof is in the pudding, so to speak. But that's all I got today. A happy new year to everyone. I hope everyone had a fantastic and amazing holiday, and I am excited to get after 2026. I am going to be more consistent for you all on the long form YouTube videos as we enter into 2026. And if you have any comments or suggestions, hit me up in the comments or hit me up in Discord, and I will see you on the next one. Peace.